Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching and or listening to this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode we will be covering the Mamluk Sultanate and the Delhi Sultanate. As well, from each empire we will highlight a specific leader. So from the Mamluk Sultanate we will highlight Sultan Baybars. And from the Delhi Sultanate we will highlight Sultan Alauddin. And we will have a rise and a fall of each empire, and then a biography of each leader, and at the end we will have a comparison of the two leaders at the end to learn more about their leadership styles perhaps, and as well perhaps more about their respective empires and their differences. So without further ado, we will begin with the first empire. So the Mamluk Sultanate was a medieval Islamic state that emerged in the 13th century, primarily in Egypt, the Levant, and Syria, following the overthrow of the Ayyubid dynasty, one of the largest dynasties we've covered so far, by the Mamluks, who were former slaves, in fact. The Mamluks were slave soldiers of the Turkic, Circassian, or Caucasian origin who were brought into the region as military slaves. So ethnically they were of fairer skin, allegedly. They eventually rose to power, establishing their own ruling class as a sultanate. So a unique sort of history started. Well, perhaps not too unique. Perhaps it could be considered analogous to the Old Testament, sort of a enslaved people, but coming to rise to create their own empire. As for some further details, so the Mamluk Sultanate, were also known as the Mamluk Egypt or the Mamluk Empire, hence making our list of largest empires. Well, not our list of largest empires, was a state ruled out of Egypt, the Levant, and the Hejaz region from the mid-13th to the early 16th centuries CE. It was ruled by a military caste of Mamluks, who were freed slave soldiers headed by a sultan. The Sultanate was established by the overthrow of the Ayyubid dynasty, which is, as we covered, the tied for the 7th largest empire of all time, in 1517 CE. The Mamluk history is generally divided into the Turkic or Bari period from 1250 to 1382, and the Circassian or Burji period from 1382 to 1517, called after the preeminent ethnicity or corpse of the ruling Mamluks during these respective eras. So within the Mamluk Empire or Sultanate, we could also divide it into these distinct periods, each of which perhaps could be worthy of its own research project. As for the rise of the Mamluk Sultanate, as promised, so the Mamluks initially served as slave soldiers in the Ayyubid Sultanate, as mentioned, which had been founded by Alauddin, who we've covered as a specific biography. However, by the mid-13th century, the Ayyubid dynasty had weakened, and internal strife, and as we covered in that episode as well, weakened control over Egypt and Syria, laying the groundwork to create a new empire or new sultanate. And the Ayyubid dynasty wasn't tied. The Abbasid dynasty or caliphate was the 7th largest empire of all time. The Ayyubid was a little bit smaller, but nonetheless it was founded by Saladin and very successful in many of the conquests of Jerusalem, for example. One of the key figures of the rise of the Mamluk Sultanate was Sultan Aybak, who became the first Mamluk ruler in Egypt after the death of Sultan as-Salih Ayyub, which helped solidify his position. He established the Bari dynasty, the first to rule over the Sultanate, named after the location of their barracks on the Nile island of Rhoda. Under the Bari Mamluks, the ruling group at this time, or dynasty at this time, Egypt expanded, and the empire expanded too. They repelled external threats and experienced a period of relative stability and prosperity, including the Seventh Crusade led by Louis IX of France, and expanded their territory into Syria, where they established control over Damascus. So they repelled, in many ways successful, the Seventh Crusade under Louis IX. As for the golden age of the Mamluk Sultanate, so the zenith of the Mamluk power came during the reign of Sultan Baybars the First, who we will highlight in a specific, or Baybars, who we will highlight in a specific biography soon, who reigned from 1260 to 1277. Baybars was a remarkable military leader who repelled the Mongol invasions, defeated the Crusaders, and expelled the Mamluk Sultanate, expanded the Mamluks' territory significantly. He also initiated significant reforms, as we shall cover, strengthening the military and improving infrastructure and fostering trade, as we shall highlight in his biography. Baybars' successors continued his policies, hence perhaps they were successful or popular, and the Mamluks reached the height of their power during the 14th century. So that should be some of the peak, which is a great thing, but that necessarily implies the fall is to come after. They controlled a vast empire stretching from Egypt to Syria to parts of modern-day Iraq and Saudi Arabia. The Mamluk Sultanate became a center of Islamic culture, attracting scholars, artists, and merchants from across the Muslim world. So, perhaps by being so strong militarily and independent, it was seen as within the state as a safe place to engage in trade. And also trade is a way of, in some ways, diffusing external threats as well. If one is a trading partner, perhaps they'd be less inclined to go to battle together. By the late 15th century, the Mamluk Sultanate was beset by political intrigue and instability. Factionalism, however, emerged among the Mamluk elite, weakening control and authority, while external threats intensified. So often we have both the culmination of these internal factors, and particularly often succession disputes or factionalism. Here is predominantly factionalism, but also these allow the external threats to often be more dangerous. In 1516, the Ottoman Sultan Selim I launched a campaign to conquer Syria, decisively defeating the Mamluk army at the Battle of Marj-Dabik. Thus came the end of the Mamluk Sultanate. So the Battle of Marj-Dabik marked the end of the Mamluk Sultanate and the beginning of the Ottoman rule in Egypt, an important empire we will soon cover. Egypt and Syria, which the Ottoman Empire ruled. Selim I entered Cairo in a triumph, a famous triumph based off the Roman triumphs, which is essentially a large parade, military parade, officially incorporating the Mamluk territories in the Ottoman Empire. But perhaps unlike the Roman triumphs, the triumph was in the captured city. Some Mamluk leaders, including the last Sultan, Tuman Bey II, were executed, while others were integrated into the Ottoman administration. So almost perhaps better than their original case of being slaves, but once again sort of being a subordinate part of another state, but still perhaps in some cases retaining powerful positions, although their central Sultan was executed. Although the Mamluks briefly regained control during a revolt in 1525 to 1527, so a 2-year period almost, their rule was effectively over. The Mamluk Sultanate left a lasting legacy in the history of the Middle East, influencing culture, architecture, and governance in the region for centuries to come. So a very, very unique or fascinating empire I find in the region. And once again, it's also in this Egypt area, which dates back to our earliest empires of all time, and now many or thousands of years later, they're still being fought over and being traded hands between different rivaling empires. So as for a biography of Sultan Baybars, or Baybars. So one of the most significant rulers of the Mamluk Sultanate was Sultan Baybars I, also known as Al-Malik al-Tahir Rukn al-Din Baybars, or al-Bakukardari. Baybars was born around 1223 in the region of Kipchak Steppe, which is now part of modern-day Russia or Kazakhstan. So hence perhaps these Mamluks were allegedly lighter or fairer in complexion, potentially. Al-Malik al-Zahir Rukn al-Din Baybars al-Bukardari, once again is his full name, lived from either 1223 or 1228, so there's a dispute on when he was born by 5 years, and he, however, died on the 1st of July 1277. He's commonly known as Baybars or Baybars, and nicknamed Abu al-Futah, which means father of conquests. So we often have many similar titles. The Great has been applied to many different leaders that we've covered. However, father of conquests seems to be a unique one of most significant leader of an empire that we've covered. He was the 4th Mamluk Sultan of Egypt and Syria. of Turkic Kipchak origin in the Bauri dynasty, succeeding Qutuz. He was one of the commanders of the Egyptian forces that inflicted a defeat of the Seventh Crusade of King Louis IX of France, so effectively winning the Seventh Crusade. He also led the vanguard of the Egyptian army at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, which marked the first substantial defeat of the Mongol army and is considered a turning point in history. So the Mongol army, the largest contiguous empire we've covered, or the second largest empire of all time, was finally defeated by this Mamluk Sultanate and Sultan Baybars. So a very significant achievement, and marking a turning point in history, ending this Mongol empire that ruled almost a fifth of the entire world, excluding Antarctica. As for his early life and rise to power, that's of Sultan Baybars, or Baybars. Baybars rose through the ranks of the Mamluk military due to his exceptional skills as a soldier and leader. He distinguished himself in battles in the Crusades and against the Mongols, earning favor from Sultan Aybak and his successors. In 1260, Baybars played a crucial role in the Battle of Ain Jalut, where the Mamluks defeated Mongol forces, marking the first significant Mongol defeat and securing Mamluk dominance in the region. As for his reign as Sultan, after the assassination of Sultan Qutuz in 1260, Baybars seized power and became Sultan of Egypt, so perhaps not. It might not have gone to him if it were not for this assassination, or it were not through the force he implied. Pardon me. In his reign, which lasted from 1260 to 1277, is considered the golden age of the Mamluk Sultanate. But because it's the golden age, that necessarily means his successors weren't as successful as him, and those before him weren't as successful as him. Unless there's multiple golden ages, however, too. But that is, here in the Mamluk Sultanate, there's considered one golden age. Baybars was a skilled military commander and statesman who consolidated Mamluk rule, strengthened the economy, and expanded the empire's borders. As for his military campaigns, Baybars launched numerous military campaigns to secure successful campaigns against Crusader states, capturing strategic strongholds such as Caesarea, Suf, and Jaffa. In 1265, he captured the fortress of Safad, the last Crusader stronghold in Galilee, effectively ending the Crusade presence in the region, so effectively winning the Seventh Crusade. Baybars also faced threats from the Mongols and other regional powers. However, he defeated the Mongol attempts to invade Syria and Egypt, so it must be noted also that it was the Mongols that were maybe leading the threats against the Mamluks, despite the Mamluks ultimately being successful. So the aggressor was the perhaps less successful one. He defeated the Mongol attempts to invade Syria and Egypt, securing the Mamluk Sultanate's borders. Additionally, he launched campaigns against the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia and the Kingdom of Cyprus, expanding the Mamluk influence of the Eastern Mediterranean, showing, as we shall see, they had naval capacities too. So, as we have seen over the history of warfare, the warfare is getting quite advanced at this point, where states can have naval domination, cavalry domination, archery domination, etc. As for reforms and governance, as Sultan, Baybars implemented significant administrative reforms to strengthen the Mamluk state. He reorganized the military, creating a professional, loyal army, so a constant standing army, which is a thing debated in the Federalist Papers in the United States, predating the United States Constitution. Whether or not the United States should have a standing army is a very fascinating discussion for another time. He reorganized the military, creating, once again, a professional army to the Sultanate rather than to the individual Mamluk commander, so a sort of centralized military rather than each sort of regional leader having armies that support the king, a different structure, whereas the king himself has the largest standing army. Perhaps a very, very significant change, and perhaps an effective one too. Some states have had either system, but to change a system is something we have not observed yet. or at least explicitly biographed. Baybars fostered trade and diplomatic relations with other Muslim states, including the Abbasid Caliphate, which is tied for the seventh largest empire of all time, with the Ayyubid Caliphate, which predated it, and the Ilkhanate in Persia, which Ilkhanate was one of the successor, or part of the Mongol Empire. History were covered in Persia. He encouraged scholars, artists, and intellectuals to flourish in Egypt, making Cairo a center of learning and culture in the Islamic world. Perhaps if it weren't for those such as Sultan Baybars or Baybars, Cairo may not have been the great significant city that it still is today. But also, he was also building on the long tradition that Cairo had. Although Cairo wasn't necessarily the capital of all the previous empires of Egypt. As for the legacy of Sultan Baybars, Baybars' reign marked a high point in the Mamluk power and influence. His military victories and administrative reforms laid the foundation for the continued prosperity of the Mamluk Sultanate in the following decades, however, none quite surpassing him as in terms of the Golden Age, or zenith. His military victories in the Seventh Crusades and as well against the Mongols marked administrative reforms laid the foundations for the continued prosperity of the Mamluk Sultanate for the following decades. Baybars is remembered as one of the greatest sultans of Mamluk history, perhaps the greatest, if not the founder himself as well, and he is revered for his leadership, military prowess, and contributions to the Islamic world. So very, very fascinating leader as well. So as for the content of this slide, the title is Sultan Baybars and the Mamluk Sultanate. It is also known as Mamluk Egypt or the Mamluk Empire. It was a military caste of Mamluks that was autonomous from the Abbasid Caliphate and headed by a sultan ruling Egypt, the Levant, and Hejaz. The significant leader was Sultan Baybars. The empire was the Mamluk Empire. Period was from 1250 to 1517 CE, Common Era, which is considered the medieval era. The modern locations include Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. Million square kilometers was 2.1, which is larger than our average empire, which is about 1.14, and that's large average of the largest empires of all time at any given point. But sometimes there's overlapping. Sometimes there might be two empires that happen to be of the largest empires of all time simultaneously in time, but nonetheless, of all the approximately 80 empires we will be covering, this would be almost double the average empire size, but significantly smaller than those such as the Mongol Empire, which was 24 million square kilometers, so over 10 times as large. But nonetheless, the Mamluk Sultanate would lead the finishing blow on the Mongol Empire. Nonetheless, the equivalent in million square kilometers is 0.81%. Of the world is 1.56%. Once again, that excludes Antarctica, and also we cannot just look at the pure percentage because some areas of the world have been more developed and fought over more previously. Egypt itself is probably the most long after region ruled by the most leading empires that we've covered, so it's a very difficult region certainly to cover, and as we shall see with the military strategy, things have gotten quite complex here. So to rule over this region is 2.1% of the world here is not the same as 2.1% of the world in some remote underpopulated place with little agriculture or perhaps no animal husbandry as well. The capital was Cairo. The government was a sultanate. The common languages were Arabic, Mamluk Kipchak, Circassian, Oghuz Turkic, Coptic, and Aramaic. The religion was Sunni Islam, which they got from, for example, the Abbasid Caliphate and the Ayyubid Caliphates, for example, which was the state religion of the Mamluk Sultanate. Shia Islam was also a minority religion, which, for example, the Fatimid Caliphate was Shia Islam. Alawite was also a minority religion, as well as Christianity and Judaism. Population was in several million, so the population in this region is now much larger, but this is an estimate based on the technology at the time. So still quite large and larger than some of the empires previously in history because technology had improved by this time. And the images in the top left, we have a probable near contemporary depiction of Sultan Baybars. So perhaps, maybe not exactly during his lifetime, but maybe based on things close to his lifetime, so perhaps in some ways accurate. Maybe not 100% accurate, but maybe some of the more important details would likely be accurate. And he was an enthroned ruler, and showing his intendants, and it's kept in the Baptistère de Saint Louis, and it was produced in, which is a famous, I believe, iron object of Mamluk Sultanate. It's a resource of sort of just a, like, I believe it's a bowl, but it has this Sultan Baybars on it, and it's kept in the Louvre itself. I've been to the Louvre many times, and I actually did not see it when I was there, so I'd like to go back and see it, actually. To the right, we have the flags according to the Catalan Atlas, which is one of the most important maps we have of the region at the time, which we'll also reference in the Delhi Sultanate. So we have the flags according to the Atlas. As we can see, these three flags, which was produced, and the Atlas was produced in circa 1375. Circa means approximately. So as we can see on the left, we can see the moon, crescent moon. In the middle one, we can see a rampant lion, and as well a crescent moon on the right as well. And the far right one is the attributed arms of the Mamluk Sultanate by Messier de Vidasti's map from 1413. So a different map, but also showing parallels in imagery. But they're once again attributed to the Mamluk Sultanate and not necessarily produced by themselves, but they can be assumed to be their standards. Below that, we have the siege of Tripoli led against the Crusaders by the Mamluk Alauddin in 1289. Here we can see the sophistication of the warfare. They have the boats here, cavalry here, they have siege equipment here, it seems some sort of siege equipment here, and as well they also have dress, for example. There's also the chivalry shown here, and etc. So really great, beautiful battle scene, I believe. To the right of that, we have, and above, we have the complex of Sultan Hassan, which was produced between 1356 to 1363. It was the largest and most costly Mamluk building in Cairo, despite the building at the time of the plague. So you can imagine how difficult that must have been, trying to build this thing during the plague, during a pandemic, or at least an epidemic. I believe it's a pandemic as well. And below that, we have itself the Mamluk Sultan and the a Mamluk Sultan. We don't know which one, but this is an image from the Catalan Atlas itself, which was produced in the late 1370s or early 1380s. So as we can see, here are the flags. We can see the rampant lion, and we can see as well the crescent moon here, and sort of showing the map. But also I noted that there's a green bird that the Sultan seems to be holding, and a purple outfit. The purple was the color of the Roman Empire. Emperor was the only one allowed to wear pure Roman purple. Pardon me. The Senate was allowed a stripe for purple. So I wonder if there's a parallel that the Sultan was also allowed to wear the purple, or it was just the particular choice of this emperor. This green bird, I'm actually not sure what it is. Maybe it's just a color contrast with the purple, because green and purple are allegedly contrasting colors, or maybe it's a sacred bird for the Mamluk Sultanate. A question perhaps one of you might be able to help me solve. It was preceded by the Abbasid Caliphate, which is tied for the largest empire of all time, 7th place. The Ayyubid dynasty, which was founded by Saladin. The Kingdom of Jerusalem as well, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, Mercuria, the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia, and the Tarhid Sultanate. And it was succeeded by the Ottoman Empire, another very large empire we'll soon be covering, and I'd be grateful if you support that episode as well. And in the top right, we have the map of the empire of the Mamluk Sultanate in approximately 1300. We can see the Mamluk Sultanate here with its 2.1 million square miles, or kilometers, pardon me. We have the Mali Empire over here, the Marinids, Spain, France, England over here, Byzantium, the Beyliks, the Ilkhanate. So the Ilkhanate, the Golden Horde, the Changtai Khanate, and the Empire of Great Khan would all be considered, that we covered in the Mongol Empire. So after Genghis Khan, it was divided amongst his successors, but nonetheless we consider them all one empire, still and cover them all in the Mongol Empire, showing this vast region. But nonetheless, the Mamluk Sultanate would lead a decisive blow against them. We have the Delhi Sultanate as well, which we will soon be covering in this episode. The Yadavas, Muscovy as well. Golden Horde, I believe I also mentioned, was part of the Mongol Empire. The Mansang, the Khmer Empire, which we previously covered. The Goryeo Empire, the famous Korean Empire. Tangus, and Kamakura Empire as well. Or state, at least. Maybe not quite the empire side. Sultan, we have Shajar al-Dur was the first sultan from 1250. Is al-Din Aibak from 1250 to 1257, so that's when they formally got their independence, or autonomy at least. And Baybars, the famous emperor who covered the alternative spelling, 1260 to 1277. And Tumen Bey II was the last sultan of the Mamluk Sultanate from 1516 to 1517. The history, the murder of Turan Shah was in the 2nd of May 1250, an important date, and the Ottoman conquest of Cairo, the decisive blow against the Mamluk Sultanate, was on the 22nd of January 1517 CE, marking the end of the Mamluk Sultanate. So that is the Sultan Baybars and the Mamluk Sultanate, and we will highlight the leader and empire more after the comparison at the end, covering the Delhi Sultanate. So the Delhi Sultanate was a medieval Islamic empire that ruled over large parts of the Indian subcontinent from the 13th to the 16th century CE. Its history is marked by a series of conquests, dynastic changes, and cultural achievements, and its eventual decline, which we shall highlight. So for some background information, the Delhi Sultanate, or the Sultanate of Delhi, was a late medieval empire primarily based in Delhi, in modern-day India, that stretched over large parts of the Indian subcontinent for 320 years, so quite a large period, even amongst the largest empires we've covered. From 1206 to 1526, following the invasion of South Asia by the Ghurid dynasty, an important dynasty we've covered previously, ruling over this region. I'm grateful if you've supported that episode as well. 5 dynasties encompass the Delhi Sultanate and ruled over this Delhi Sultanate sequentially. First, the Mamluk dynasty, not to be confused with the Mamluk Sultanate we just covered. The Mamluk dynasty, also known as the slave dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate, because the Mamluks were slaves, generally speaking, or freed slaves rather, from 1206 to 1290 CE. The Khalji dynasty from 1290 to 1320, the Tughlaq dynasty from 1320 to 1414, the Sayyid dynasty from 1014 to 1451, and the Lodi dynasty, the last of the 5, from 1451 to 1526. It covered large swaths of territory in modern-day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, as well as some parts of Nepal. So, as for the rise of the Delhi Sultanate, so the Delhi Sultanate traces its origins to the invasion of North India by Turkic and Afghan armies led by Mahmud of Ghazni, an important leader we've highlighted in the late 10th and early 11th centuries. These invasions weakened the existing Hindu dynasties and paved the way for the establishment of Islamic rule in the region. So as you might guess, India is formerly not Islamic, and this was an Islamic empire within India, so a unique history here and a unique empire for the regions. These invasions weakened the existing Hindu dynasties and paved the way for the establishment of Islamic rule in the region. The Delhi Sultanate formally began in 1206 when Qutb al-Din Aibak, a former slave of Muhammad Ghori, declared himself Sultan of Delhi after Ghori's death, so declaring independence and claiming a throne for himself. A very brave thing to do, but also we've seen had been done many times throughout history in the creation of empires. Many times it is this figure who declares, I am Sultan, for example, in this case, and declares an empire for themselves. Aibak founded the Mamluk dynasty, which ruled Delhi until 1290. The Mamluk dynasty, not to be confused with the Mamluk Sultanate, which we previously covered, ruling out of Egypt and Cairo particularly. So we have in the Delhi Sultanate, we have the Mamluk dynasty ruling over it, and in Egypt we have the Mamluk Sultanate ruling over it. Two separate Mamluk groups, however, both Islamic, but one in Egypt and one in India. So it's nice actually to pair them together in one episode to help explain this, perhaps, confusion. Under subsequent rulers such as Iltutmish and Balban, the Delhi Sultanate expanded its territories through military conquests, incorporating much of North India into its domain, as we shall see, producing a very large region for itself. Well over double, almost 3 times as large as our average largest empires. The sultans established a centralized administration, introduced Islamic law, and promoted Persian culture and language. So quite unique. So religiously Arabic, perhaps culturally ruled by Persian, but also ruling over and within the Indian subcontinent. As for the golden age and cultural flourishing of the Delhi Sultanate, between the period of the 13th and 14th century is often regarded as the golden age of the Delhi Sultanate. The sultans, particularly during the Khalji and Tughlaq dynasties, pardon me for my pronunciation, that's hard for me, Tughlaq dynasties, presided over a period of relative stability, economic prosperity, and cultural flourishing. So we can think of the Khalji dynasties and the Tughlaq dynasties as perhaps the peak or the zenith of the 5 dynasties that ruled over the Delhi Sultanate. As for Sultan Alauddin Khalji, the specific leader whom we will highlight from the Khalji dynasty, the second of the 5 dynasties within the Delhi Sultanate, was one of the most notable rulers during this era, ruling over the zenith of the Delhi Sultanates. He expanded the Delhi Sultanate's territory through military campaigns in South India this time, establishing strong administrative systems and implementing economic reforms and regular prices and taxes. So after a huge region, having regulated prices is effective for having a centralized government, but also taxes also implied that there was private enterprise to be taxed in the first place, so not entirely centralized. His reign witnessed significant cultural achievements, including the construction of monuments like Alai Darwaza and Qutub Minar complex. A very small detail I recently read Herodotus under Darius's, he had the tributes from all the satrapies within the Persian Empire. What he had was allegedly, according to Herodotus, India was able to produce vast, almost as much as all the other satrapies because it produced pure gold dust. And allegedly they had these gold dust and these massive ants. He said these ants were, according to the translation, larger than a dog but smaller than a fox. And they would, an ant really, and they would throw up this gold dust, but they're dangerous, so they would have a female camel and 2 male camels because the female camel was faster, and the rider would ride on the female camel, and they'd run and pick up the gold dust, and then eventually the male camels who were slower would fall behind and get defeated by the ants. But hence, allegedly, the Indians collected the gold dust and produced it for the Persian Empire. Probably not a lot of truth to this, but if anyone perhaps could find these massive ants or this gold dust in India, perhaps it would be quite a significant achievement in terms of history. But nonetheless, there necessarily was private enterprise and much riches in India during the region, and thus able to produce many of these great monuments, as we shall see. Our Indus Valley, almost as long as our history of Egypt, so also fascinating that this episode covers a region of Egypt and a region of India, because our Egypt kingdoms, Old Kingdom of Egypt, Middle Kingdom of Egypt, and New Kingdom of Egypt, some of our earliest empires, but also we have the Indus Valley civilizations, maybe not as formalized or as centralized as our Egypt empire. Maybe the Indus Valley civilization perhaps doesn't even qualify as an empire in itself, but we did have, for example, the Magab dynasties, or etc., and the Ghurid dynasties. It's still a region that had been populated and civilized, relatively civilized, compared to much of the rest of the world, allegedly, for a long period of time. But nonetheless came its decline and fragmentation. So the Delhi Sultanate began to decline in the middle of the 14th century even, due to internal strife weak leadership, and external threats, but it's in later portions when it started to get really worse. The Tughlaq dynasty, which ruled from 1320 to 1414, faced challenges such as rebellions, revolts, and invasions from the neighboring kingdoms. So although perhaps including part of the Golden Age, necessarily the decline also started in this period. The most significant blow to the Delhi Sultanate came with the invasion of Timur or Tamerlane, the Turco-Mongol conqueror, very famous leader we'll highlight as well. In 1398, Timur sacked Delhi, causing widespread destruction and destabilizing the empire. Although the Tughlaq dynasty continued to rule for a few more decades, their authority was greatly diminished. As for the rise of provincial kingdoms and the Mughal Empire, in the 15th century, witnessed the rise of provincial kingdoms and fragmentations of the Delhi Sultanate. So the successor following the Tughlaq dynasty, the Sayyid dynasty, and the Lodi dynasty were relatively less successful. Regional governors and military commanders declared independence in the later periods, establishing their own kingdoms in different parts of India. One of the most notable of these regional kingdoms was the Sultanate of Malwa, ruled by the Khilji dynasty, which emerged in Central India. Another significant development was the rise of the Bahmani Sultanate in the Deccan region, which challenged Delhi's authority in the south. So this fragmentation that has ended many of the greatest empires we've covered so far. The final blow to the Delhi Sultanate, however, came with the arrival of Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, an important empire we'll highlight soon, who defeated Ibrahim Lodi, the last Sultan of Delhi of the Lodi dynasty, in the first battle of Panipat in 1526. This marked the end of the Delhi Sultanate and the beginning of the Mughal region rule in India. An important empire we'll highlight, the Mughal Empire, and they led the decisive blow on the Lodi dynasty within the Delhi Sultanate. So as for a specific leader, Alauddin Khalji of the Khalji dynasty, perhaps the zenith of the Delhi Sultanate. One of the most significant rulers of the Delhi Sultanate was Alauddin Khalji, known as Sultan Alauddin Khalji. His reign, which lasted from 1296 to 1316, marked a period of significant military expansion, administrative reform, and cultural achievement. So Alauddin Khalji, for some background information, reigned from 1296 to 1316, was born Ali Gur Shasp, was ruler of the Khalji dynasty that ruled the Delhi Sultanate in the Indian subcontinent. Alauddin instituted a number of significant administrative changes related to revenues, price controls, and society, as previously mentioned. He also successfully fended off several Mongol invasions in India. As for his early life and rise to power, Alauddin Khalji was born in 1250 CE in a Turkic family of military background, so ethnically Turkic. He initially served as a provincial governor under Sultan Alauddin Khalji, the founder of the Khalji dynasty. So he ruled as a provincial governor under this individual, but also connected by blood. However, his ambition and military prowess soon caught the attention of Jalaluddin's nephew and successor, but he himself was not the successor, Sultan Jalaluddin's nephew and successor, Alauddin Khalji, who appointed him as general. So his nephew appointed him as general. As for his reign as Sultan, upon ascending to the throne in 1296 after assassinating Jalaluddin, Alauddin Khalji embarked on a series of ambitious military campaigns to expand the Delhi Sultanate's territories. His conquests included the annexation of the Gurjat region, the Ranthambore region, Malwa, Chittor, and other parts of South India. So the Delhi Sultanate had previously been expanding much north. It was through Sultan Alauddin Khalji that it went significantly south as well. Alauddin's military successors further strengthened the Delhi Sultanate's position as a dominant power in the Indian subcontinent and the leading power. As for administrative reforms, Alauddin Khalji is famous for implementing several administrative reforms aimed at centralizing power and strengthening the state. He established a rigorous system of revenue collection, also once again implying private enterprise to be taxed in the first place, known as the Dasala system, which fixed taxes on agricultural produce based on the fertility of land. So sort of in some way balanced or some way equitable. So if one has a bad plot of land, perhaps they won't be taxed as much, or some sort of equalizing or social policies or society policies as well. This system ensured a stable source of revenue for the government and provided financial support for Alauddin's military campaigns. Alauddin also, perhaps he was inspired by the formal taxation policies that previously Darius had implemented in the region. Perhaps they were inspired to later have their own taxation policies. But taxation had already existed, for example, before Darius, informally, and perhaps even within the Indus Valley civilizations previously to some extent. So it's not as though Darius necessarily invented taxation, but he did formalize it within the Persian Empire according to Herodotus, and perhaps in some way that might have had some influence, because if some regions of India had been experienced taxation, perhaps there might have been some influence, but nonetheless taxation probably would have existed in the region regardless of Darius's existence. But nonetheless, Alauddin also introduced price controls and market regulations to stabilize prices and prevent inflation. So very sophisticated monetary or fiscal policy, or particularly monetary policy. His market reforms, known as market control or Dirazi-e-Ars, aim to ensure the welfare of the common people and maintain social order. As for his military achievements, Alauddin Khalji's military achievements were unparalleled in the history of the Delhi Sultanate. He successfully repelled the Mongol invasions. It's a very significant achievement for the Mongol Empire. Was the largest empire in all of history at the time in Central Asia, and defeated the Mongol army at the Battle of Amroha in 1305. Alauddin's victory over the Mongols solidified his reputation as a formidable military leader and further enhanced the prestige of the Delhi Sultanate. As for his cultural patronage, despite his reputation as a ruthless conqueror, Alauddin Khalji was known also as a patron of the arts and architecture, and literature as well. He commissioned the construction of several monuments, and which is something I believe monuments in some ways is an epitome of art, because one must first master the foundation, etc., before one can be entitled or be capable of the creative aspects. Or maybe the creative aspects are simultaneously harmonious with the constructive necessity, an alternative hypothesis. He commissioned the construction of several monumental structures, including the Alai Darwaza and the Alai Minar, which were intended to surpass the grandeur of the Qutub Minar complex. Alauddin's patronage of culture and architecture contributed to the flourishing of art and architecture during his reign. Many of these monuments still exist to this day. Beautiful, beautiful sights and beautiful country and great country of India. As for the legacy, Alauddin Khalji's reign represents a transformative period in the history of the Delhi Sultanate. His military conquests, administrative reforms, and cultural patronage laid the foundation for the empire's continued expansion and prosperity in the following centuries. Once again, a very long-lived empire as well, 320 years across different dynasties, however. Despite the controversy surrounding his methods, Alauddin Khalji's contribution to the Delhi Sultanate's growth and stability are widely acknowledged by historians. So perhaps even unique to other emperors or leaders, sultans as well, that not only was he successful in military conquests and through trade, etc., he was also very unique in being successful in addressing inflation, etc., and addressing the economy as well, which seems to be at least a newer thing we've seen with the empires we've covered so far, or a newer focus. But it's not to say monetary policy and inflation had not been addressed previously, which it has, as we've covered in previous empires, but here at an even more conscious way, and even naming these monetary policies, for example. As for the legacy, Alauddin Khalji represents a transformative period in the history of the Delhi Sultanate. His military conquests, administrative reforms, and cultural patronage laid a foundation for the empire's continued prosperity for the following centuries. Despite the controversy surrounding his methods, Alauddin Khalji's contribution to the Delhi Sultanate's growth and prosperity are widely acknowledged by historians. and perhaps he is the most significant leader of the Delhi Sultanate, or at least ruling over its zenith. So, as for the content of the slide, the title is Sultan Alauddin Khalji and the Delhi Sultanate. Following the Ghurid dynasty, it was 5 dynasties ruled over large parts of the Indian subcontinent from Delhi, usually around Delhi, but there were other capitals, as we shall highlight, for 320 years. The 5 dynasties of the Delhi Sultanate were the Mamluk dynasty, which ruled from 1206 to 1290, the Khalji dynasty from 1290 to 1320, the Tughlaq dynasty from 1320 to 1414, the Sayyid dynasty from 1414 to 1451, and the Lodi dynasty from 1451 to the end of the Delhi Sultanate in 1526 CE. The significant leader was Alauddin Khalji. The empire was Delhi. The Delhi Sultanate. The period was from 1206 to 1526 CE, known as the medieval period. The modern locations include India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Million square kilometers was 3.2, so the average of the largest empires of all time is 1.14. So we have 3.2, over double the size of the average empire. Almost getting close to 3 times the size of our average largest empire, but much smaller than, for example, our largest contiguous empire, which would be the Mongol Empire at 24 million, for example. Million square kilometers is 1.24, and that's the equivalent. The percent of the world is 2.37%. That's excluding Antarctica, but it is quite a significant portion because this Indus Valley and Indian subcontinent more broadly has been relatively civilized for a very long period of time, unlike some of our more nomadic regions, which might be relatively easier to rule over as if one has a sufficient cavalry. And there are less strongholds, for example, to defend. Capitals were, first was Lahore from 1206 to 1210, Badayan from 1210 to 1214, Delhi from 1214 to 1327, and as well from 1334 to 1506. Daulatabad from 1327 to 1334, and Agra from 1506 to 1526. The government was a sultanate. Common languages include Persian, which was the official and court language of the sultanate, Hindavi, which was the semi-official language from 1451 to 1526, or a period, and it was also the language of the elites from 1320 to 1526. So the elites was the ruling language, and then for a period it also became the semi-official language, but over the whole history it was also the lingua franca, so the common language amongst people. As for religion, was Sunni Islam, because it was the state religion that originally has Islamic roots, rather than Hinduism, which was the majority religion of the region. So once we've seen this in some previous empires, but not the norm, where one ruling class is different from the majority, at least in this case religiously and also ethnically. As well, there was Jainism, which is an old religion which we covered in History of Leaders of Thoughts in India as well, Buddhism as well, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism, which are also religions relevant in the regions that the Delhi Sultanate ruled in. Population was in several tens of millions, so population is now getting quite large. India is now the largest population in the world as of 2023, but it's 2024 now, but nonetheless this population was is now today in the billions. It was only several tens of millions. It's much smaller because agriculture has changed, but this is still very large compared to many other empires we've covered, and even large for the 3.2 million square kilometers for the time, and compared to many of the empires we've covered previously. And we had allegedly the Mamluk Sultanate was a little bit smaller, but in the several millions. This is several tens of millions, so perhaps the Delhi Sultanate could, in terms of population, be up to 10 times as large as the Mamluk Sultanate, which we covered in the Egypt region at a similar period too. And in terms of, but perhaps due to different technologies, and perhaps these could be speculations, perhaps it could be completely incorrect, and several has a broad range. Several is anywhere between 3 and 99. As for images, in the top left we have a 17th century portrait of Alauddin Khalji. To the right of that, we have the flag of Delhi Sultanate according to, once again, the Catalan Atlas, which is an important map produced during circa 1375. Important map for the region, and also an important resource as well for our Mamluk Sultanate, which we've also highlighted in this episode. To the right of that, we have the Alai Darwaza, completed in 1311, showing beautiful architecture of the Indian subcontinent during the Khalji dynasty. To the right of that, we have a depiction of Ghiyath al-Din Tughlaq, founder of the Tughlaq dynasty, in the Bastion Aluns by the Ikistan al-Dabir, a member of the Tughlaq court and ambassador to Iran, circa 1410. And it was a Jayavid copy of the 1326 original, which was lost. So, unfortunately, this is not the original source, but, for example, once again, hopefully the main features are correct, and we can see sort of how they might have dressed, and as we can see, they wear what looks like a crown as well, and it seems to be gold. It seems to be the royal color in this case. To the right of that, we have the tomb of Shah Rukh-i-Alam at Multan, built during the reign of Ghiyas-ud-Din Tughlaq in 1320 CE, once again showing the beautiful architecture of the region. I'm fortunate to go to Rajasthan and Udaipur in India, and I'd really like to go back to India and see many of these sites as well. Below that, we have Tughlaq, and this was also produced during the Tughlaq dynasty, once again. Below that, and the previous was the architectural achievement we have was from the Khalji dynasty. Below that, we have the tomb of Muhammad Shah at the Lodi Gardens in New Delhi, but it was produced during the Sayyid dynasty. So we now have three sort of architectural pieces from different dynasties we can sort of see, and progressively from the top left to the sort of center, and then below to the right, those are sort of chronology of architecture, we could say. As to the, I kept calling it as architectural achievement, but the one in the top left of the Khalji dynasty is actually a gate, but it's really beautiful looking gate. To the right of that, it was preceded by the Ghurid Empire, an important empire we've covered previously, and I'd be grateful if you'd support that episode, or if you have. It was succeeded by the Mughal Empire, an important empire we've covered, the Bengal Sultanate, the Bahmani Sultanate, the Gujarat Sultanate, Jaipur Sultanate, the Khandesh Sultanate, the Madurai Sultanate, and the Malwa Sultanate, all important empires we will cover, perhaps directly or indirectly, whether or not they're large enough to make our list of largest empires. As for some important sultans, from 1206 to 1210 was Qutb-ud-Din Aibak, who was the first sultan, and 1570 to 1526 we have Ibrahim Lodi, who is the last. So, and we can see that Lodi is the last of the dynasties. And the independence was declared for the Delhi Sultanate on 12th of June in 1206 CE, and the Battle of Panipat was in the 21st of April, 1526. The currency was the taka as well. Currency was important to note here because currency was a very important priority for Alauddin Khalji. As for in the top right, we have the map of the world, perhaps in allegedly in 1320. So we can see the very large region of the Delhi Sultanate at 3.2 million square kilometers, almost 3 times large, and certainly over double the largest empires of all history. We can have our Mongol successor states. We have the Il Khanate, the Golden Horde, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Empire of the Great Khan, or the Yuan dynasty. So those are all considered part of the Mongol Empire, which we've covered. We have Georgia here, the Beyliks, the Muscovy as well, important empire as well, and the Mamluk Sultanate, which we previously covered. So in the Egypt region, the Delhi Sultanate, and the Delhi Sultanate was previously ruled over a Mamluk dynasty, so both also Islamic, but in different regions, but also both very old regions of the world. We have Pinya, Khmer, important empire we've covered, somewhat aquatic as well, one of the fascinating aquatic empires we've covered. I'm grateful if you support that episode as well. Goryeo, famous Korean empire, and Tungus as well. So, as for a comparison between Baybars and Alauddin Khalji, so the full name of Baybars is on the slide here: Al-Malik al-Zahir, Rukn al-Din Baybars, al-Bundukadari, and Alauddin Khalji, but we will for short call them Sultan Baybars and Sultan Alauddin. So, Sultan Baybars of the Mamluk Sultanate and Alauddin Khalji of the Delhi Sultanate were two significant rulers who left lasting impacts on their respective empires during the medieval period. While they shared certain characteristics and accomplishments, there are also notable differences in their backgrounds, reigns, and legacies that we might be able to distill their uniqueness. So, as for their background and rise to power, Baybars was born into slavery in the Kipchak steppe and rose through the ranks of the Mamluk military to become Sultan of Egypt. So the Mamluks are former slaves, and he rose through the ranks in Syria after the death of Sultan Qutuz becoming the leader. His rise to power was marked by his exceptional military prowess and leadership skills, which earned him loyalty in the Mamluk elite. But maybe if he did not have manifest these features, he would not necessarily have come to rule over and to be Sultanate. So perhaps it was likely through merit that Baybars came to power, maybe more merit than many of the other leaders, especially most of the hereditary leaders of most empires we've covered. As for Alauddin Khalji, Sultan Alauddin was born into a Turkic family and served as a provincial governor before ascending to the throne of the Delhi Sultanate, so perhaps a little bit more of a political path. He seized power through a coup against his uncle, however, ultimately manifesting in violence of Sultan Jalaluddin Khalji, so his uncle, who originally had been investing in him, and consolidated his authority through military conquests and administrative reforms. So both of them knew how to use the sword and the stick. Alauddin Khalji perhaps had to betray his uncle, however, to come into power, whereas Baybars maybe had a little bit more about purity. But there was an assassination of Sultan Qutuz before, so maybe there was also an intrigue. So maybe both of them, there was sort of evil way in which they acquired the throne, but at least this is more certain for Alauddin Khalji with his coup, whereas Baybars may not have been responsible for the assassination of Qutuz. As for their military achievements, which they were both certainly similar in that they were both very successful, Baybars was renowned for his military achievements, including repelling the Mongol invasions, defeating the Crusaders, and expanding the Mamluk Sultanate's territories, as we've highlighted, for example, the Seventh Crusade, and defeating, in many ways, successful against the Mongol Empire, which was the largest of all time up to this period, although somewhat more divided during this period. He secured strategic victories at the Battle of Ain Jalut against the Mongols and captured the Crusader strongholds such as Caesarea and Jaffa. As for Alauddin Khalji was a formidable military leader who has expanded the Delhi Sultanate's territories through conquests in North and South India. He successfully repelled Mongol invasions, so both of them were successful against the Mongols, so perhaps they both in similar level of military capacity. But maybe the Mongols were stronger on one front. He successfully and defeated several Hindu kingdoms as well, which were formidable forces that have been existent for very long periods of time, including the Yadava and Devagiri, and the Rajputs, and the Chittor and Ranthambore. As for administrative reforms, Baybars implemented administrative reforms aimed at strengthening the Mamluk Sultanate's governance and economy. He reorganized the military, so having one of the, maybe not necessarily under Baybars, but something he likely supported was the standing army, perhaps somewhat a unique feature, but many, actually, I would say most empires thus far had sole standing armies, but at least it was a change that was engaged in during this sultanate. And furthermore, he reorganized the military, improved infrastructure, and fostered trade and commerce, contributing to the empire's stability and prosperity. Alauddin Khalji introduced several administrative reforms, including the Dasala system of revenue collections or taxation system. Not much is, but we don't know necessarily if Baybars was as sophisticated in implementing changes in taxation systems. So perhaps maybe a point for Alauddin Khalji, or at least as there's more documented about his successes in taxation collection than by Baybars. But that is not to say Baybars wasn't necessarily the better tax collector. Just posterity has documented more about Alauddin Khalji's endeavors. Alauddin, furthermore, including the Dasala system of revenue collection and market regulation to control prices and prevent inflation, so very sophisticated monetary policy, or fiscal policy at this time. His reforms aimed to centralize power, increase state revenue, and ensure social order within the Delhi Sultanate. So both very sophisticated, both through domestic policies as well, but there's sort of maybe more detailed about Alauddin Khalji's, whereas Baybars' changes may have been more focused on military reforms. But Alauddin Khalji may have equally made more military reforms, but there's just more discussed about his financial policies. As for their cultural patronage, while Baybars was primarily known for his military achievements, he also contributed to the cultural and architectural development of the Mamluk Sultanate. He commissioned the construction of several monuments and structures, including the Al-Azhar Mosque and the Citadel of Cairo. So, all else equal, perhaps there are more relics existent for Baybars as he constructed more monuments. So, physically, maybe he achieved more. Maybe Alauddin Khalji was more successful in collecting taxes, but ultimately, perhaps his investment of creating more monuments was maybe. I believe Alauddin Khalji perhaps surpassed Baybars as well in monuments as well. So, but maybe it was through his taxation that this was permitted. Alauddin Khalji was patron of the arts and architecture, commissioning the construction of several monumental structures as well, including the Alai Darwaza and the Alai Minar. He promoted Persian literature and culture during his reign. So, although maybe Alauddin Khalji produced more monuments, but Baybars as well produced many monuments, it's impossible to weigh in on whose monuments are better, but perhaps those by Alauddin Khalji, as we saw from the images, are better kept. Maybe that's better because there's more appreciation. Maybe it's because they were not defeated as, those who defeated them were not as harsh on the relics. But nonetheless, for some reason, Alauddin's relics and monuments last longer. Perhaps they were produced slightly after, but nonetheless, that is something to note. As for their legacy, which sort of is connected, Baybars is remembered as one of the greatest sultans in Mamluk history, revered for his military prowess, administrative reforms, and contribution to Islamic culture and architecture. His reign marked a period of stability and prosperity for the Mamluk Sultanate, its zenith, but although it's its zenith, it means the empire necessarily did not do as well after him. Similarly, Alauddin Khalji's reign represents a transformative period in the history of the Delhi Sultanate, and also a zenith, but also means necessarily things did not go as well after him. But still the empires existed and did well after them, but the peak is, for both of these encompass the peak, which is necessarily their similarity. Neither of them founded their empire, as many of the other leaders we have had, whereas both of these sort of came to power perhaps in some way through force, either through assassination and certainly through a coup. And Alauddin Khalji's reign represents a transformative period in the history of the Delhi Sultanate, characterized by military expansion, administrative centralization, and cultural patronage. So Alauddin Khalji may have been slightly more focused on economy. Both of them were, however, both focused on architectural achievements. Perhaps Baybars was more focused on religion, perhaps. Although Alauddin Khalji was also, to some degree, focused on the state religion as well. Despite the controversy surrounding his methods, this is Alauddin Khalji, his contribution to the Delhi Sultanate's growth and stability are widely acknowledged. So both Baybars and Alauddin Khalji generally have a positive legacy as well. And they're both, as well, a similarity is that they are both sultans as well, and both Islamic as well, religions. So many similarities, but also some different nuances. Both of them did, however, have similarity, perhaps in maybe more of a surprise in how they came into power, one through assassination, one through a coup, but we don't know if Baybars was involved in the assassination, but we do know Alauddin Khalji was involved in the assassination. So, thank you very much for watching this episode. I hope it was exciting because we covered two regions that we've studied much of before. This is Ages of Empires. This is Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for your support, and I very much hope you to continue to provide it. Thank you so much.